Hello, NaNoWriMo. I am Grant Faulkner. I'm Executive Director of NaNoWriMo. Thanks so much for joining us today for publishing strategies. We're going to talk a lot of strategies because we're talking about that wonderful but intimidating next step of the creative journey of writing your book is publishing it. It's wonderful because you're truly giving birth to it. You're bringing it into the world and hopefully finding readers in the audience. And that's a magical, magical feeling. But it's intimidating because for exactly that reason, you're making yourself vulnerable. You're putting it out into the world and, accepting critiques or low sales, whatever, it's just intimidating. And, I've published 5 books now. I've self-published. I've published with a tiny press or small presses. I've also published with large presses, and you'd think that I would know a lot at this point, and I know a lot, but what I'm amazed by is how much I have to continually learn, how much I don't know, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to dive in and tackle some of those big questions, like even whether should you self-publish or traditionally publish, and if you self-publish, how do you do it, and how do you be successful in it? So we're going to answer those questions, and I want to just pause before we start, though, to thank our sponsor, IngramSpark. And IngramSpark is an award-winning self-publishing platform and also a long-time NaNoWriMo sponsor. They've been really great to us. And what's cool about IngramSpark is that it helps authors and independent publishers access the same quality and distribution as major traditional publishers. We get really fine books, and that goes across whether it's a hardcover, paperback, ebook. It provides global book distribution to 39,000 libraries and retailers, and that includes Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, so you can get like tremendous distribution with IngramSpark. And they also want to note this, and we'll put links up later, but they've got a ton of free publisher education for you, including online courses and a weekly blog and a podcast and calculators. So check out IngramSpark's resources, and we'll post those links in the chat window. So let's get going. I want to introduce our publishing experts who've joined us to share their wisdom. First, we're joined by Justine Bilo. And Justine is a graduate of NYU's Tisch School of Dramatic Writing. She majored in dialogue. That's the way I put it, at least. And she's a good dialogue writer because she worked as an intern for the Stephen Colbert Report, and some of her, snappy one-liners ended up as jokes on the air. She later worked in reality TV development at Oxygen and Bravo, and she's an occasional romance writer. And since she pledged to me that she's going to do NaNoWriMo this year, I think she's going to be a regular romance writer. She's going to be in the same position you are. She's going to finish her book and publish it. And now she is IngramSpark Acquisitions Manager, which means she knows all about getting independent authors and publishers' books into the world. In fact, she's been called an indie publishing Sherpa. Welcome, Justine, our local indie publishing Sherpa.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Grant. The indie publishing Sherpa, I love that title. I asked my boss if I could put it on my business card, but I got shot down. So, oh well, I know.
I was gonna say, because you're gonna take us up the mountain to the heights where the air gets a little thin, right?
Yes, I take you up the publishing mountain, and yeah, I don't lead you astray. Yes.
That's why I brought my NaNoWriMo face mug, because we're going to go way up to the stars, the moon. We're going to uncharted territory today.
Yeah, I just brought Duncan because Justine runs on Duncan. So, oh well.
Just as long as your beverage is fueling you. Yeah. And our other guest is, you saying something, John?
No.
Okay, I'm going to introduce you. You are the professional author and ghostwriter, John Peragine, who's going to provide the author perspective on all the publishing issues today. And John has participated in NaNoWriMo 5 times. Congratulations, John.
Thank you.
He is prolific beyond NaNoWriMo, though. He's a published author of 14 books, and he's ghostwritten over 100 others, which I'm awestruck by that. And he also does a ton of freelance writing for publications like the New York Times, Reuters, Bloomberg News, Writer's Digest, Winemaker Magazine, and Speaker Magazine, just to name a few. And he's also a book coach, and I'm sure much more. Thanks for joining us, John.
Well, thanks for having me. Although I don't get a really cool title like Justine got, but I'm okay with that.
By the end of the webcast, we're going to come up with a cool title for you, and
Okay.
I'm going to invite our NaNoWriMo participants to give titles for John.
Oh,
He's lacking a really good title. So if you can we're going to top Justine's title. Something.
Oh, this is a good challenge. I like it.
Yeah, good challenge. So everyone's going to have a title. Maybe I'll come out with a new title. Well, cool. Well, before we jump in, I just want to tell everybody who is watching that if you have questions, please post them in the chat window, because our producer, Catherine Grip, is going to look at those questions and send them to me so that I can ask John and Justine. And the way this is going to work is I'm going to interview John and Justine for, I don't know, 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to open it up and try to answer all of your questions before the hour's over. So please ask questions. You have the best questions. So I want to start at the very, very beginning of this publishing journey. Since both of you have worked with so many writers in different capacities and at different levels, I'm curious, what's the most common question you're asked about how to get published?
Ooh, that's actually a tough one. I think it depends on the writer. If it's their first time publishing a book, I think the most common question is, what do I do next after they've actually finished the book? And my answer to that is always find an editor. Like, please find an editor, because you've written this wonderful thing that you want to put out into the world, but it's a diamond in the rough. And before you put it out, you need to polish that diamond. And finding a really good editor will do that for you. And it's worth the investment to do that. And that's if you're going the self-publishing route. If you're going the traditional route, most often they assign you an editor. But if you're going the self-publishing route, please find an editor. That's very much the next step.
And finding an editor, that doesn't mean like leaving your manuscript on your sister's bed and asking her to read it, or giving it to your best friend.
No, and please don't have your mom read it. No, a professional.
Moms often get trashed at this point in the publishing journey. Everyone says, don't give it to your mom.
I know. It's a sad statement, especially because my mom's actually good at this stuff, but they love you too much. You need someone who's a little bit hard on you, who will really make it into that finished, polished product. And hiring a professional who will be an objective third party is always a good thing. And there are many resources where you can find someone like that. We have them on our resources page, and so please go check that out for places we recommend to go find editors.
Cool. How about you, John? What's a common question you hear?
Well, I was going to add to what Justine said, that even if you go to the traditional route, if you want to get a traditional publisher, you still need an editor, because you don't want to be handing a manuscript to a literary agent that is a mess, because they're not going to give you so you still need that. And there's always, and probably we'll talk about a little bit about the different kinds of editing that there is, that there's not just one kind. But I think the most common question, I know that this happens a lot, is, how do I become a bestseller? And so I have to go through that.
You're going to tell us right now, right?
Right. And I have to go through that conversation and really try to educate them on what that really means. And I always say that, from my perspective, bestseller doesn't always mean best book. It just means it sold more, and that's a whole marketing kind of thing. But if that I try to get them to focus really on writing the best book possible, or, if they're at the point of they're ready to publish, that is the best, it's your best effort. And so I think what Justine was saying, that a lot of people skip on that step of editing, no matter where they are in the process. And I think that's a mistake, because, most people, if they start reading a book, especially if it's self-published and there's all kinds of mistakes, they're not going to get through the first chapter, so that's essential. And, the other thing that I guess the other common thing is, how much is it going to cost? How much is it, what's the investment? And so we really talk about that there is an investment involved. I mean, even if you go with a traditional publisher, there's still an investment involved, whether it's marketing or editing or any of those kinds of things. And it just really depends on, which way they want to go.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because when you mentioned that it behooves one to get your book professionally edited before submitting it to a literary agent, I hear about that more and more. People who are paying for editorial services when they go the traditional route as well. And since we're talking about this, I hear this question all the time. Novelists grapple with whether they should go the traditional route, which, by the way, can take years and years. It takes a long time to find an agent. It can take your agent a fairly long time to sell the book, and then getting it edited and ready to publish and go into the world, that also takes a long time. And on the other hand, there's the self-publishing route, which is full of its own sort of daunting and intimidating things to deal with as well. It's got its own learning curve. So how do you help people sort through that and help decide which path is best for them?
That's a really good question. I always say that there are two types of authors in the world: authors who want to be entrepreneurs and authors who just want to write. Sometimes the two meet. And there's a gray area, so I will say that. But if you are an author who wants nothing to do with the business side of it, who just wants to sit behind their computer and write, you probably the traditional route is the way for you to go, because you will have a team to support you from a publishing house, who will help you through who will handhold you through the whole publishing process. However, I will say that in today's world, it is not unreasonable for a publishing house to expect you to help market the book. Even if you're a fairly well-known author, they will ask you to help market the book. Unless you're like James Patterson, that's when you get the Uber marketing dollars. However, if you are an author who also really wants to be an entrepreneur and wants control over the product, control over the cover, control over the release date, I'm type A. I like to control things. If you know that about yourself, then self-publishing is a really great way for you to go. Also, if you have a really timely book that you need to get out quickly, self-publishing is also a really good route for you as well. So you really have to act as the publishing house when you are a self-publisher. Don't think of yourself as just an author. You have to wear all the hats. So that is something to consider when you are trying to make the decision.
Great. I love that when you said that even when you're traditionally published, I think a lot of people have the misconception that you're just coddled and taken care of from there, that you don't really have to do anything more than write the book, which did used to be the way it kind of was.
Yeah.
Years ago. But I think I always say every author is really a self-published author in the end, in terms of like how you have to, the energy you have to put behind the book.
Exactly. And I think John can talk about this a little bit more, but when my agent was going out with my book proposal, the things that the publishing houses were asking me were, how many Facebook followers, Twitter followers, Instagram followers do you have? How can you market the book? They were asking me those questions instead of saying, this is what we can do for your book. So the world has changed a little bit. But John, you can speak to that a little bit more since you're going through that right now.
Yeah. No, I think and so what I say to the folks that I work with, there's always that forked path, that if they want to try for the traditional publishing, I still want them to take the self-publishing route, because you're still building a platform to sell the book, because that's what the publishers want to know. They're a business. They want to make money. They want to know if they can sell your book. If you are only going to sell about 100 copies, they're not really interested in that, because that's a bad business model for them. So, but even if somebody's self-publishing, I'm still saying you still need to build that platform, because you could write the greatest book in the world, but we have a market now that it's going to sit on a shelf. It's going to be the next great thing. But if nobody knows it's there, or if you don't have a way to connect with your audience, it could be overwhelming to try to make a noise, in that market, and we talk. Justine and I have worked together with some authors, and just really talking about that, how are you going to sell this book? And as far as, some of the folks I work with a lot of nonfiction authors that are just wanting to build a platform. So they want it as a credibility piece. So it doesn't necessarily make sense for them to go the traditional path. But I think it's just, a lot of it's just education, because a lot of people don't know what are the pros, what are the cons? People think that, well, if I don't get it with a traditional publisher, nobody's going to see it as credible. Well, that's old news, because there are plenty of really good writers that we all know that went from the traditional publishing world and went to self-publishing because they didn't want to give up as much control, and they were leaving a lot of money on the table. So once they built that, so once they built that platform, they're like, hey, I can do this, because we live in a world we can do that now.
Yeah, I was going to mention, here's Hugh Howey's Wool, which he wrote during NaNoWriMo, by the way.
Oh.
And he was a huge self-publishing sensation. So he started out with self-publishing, but I can't remember all the particulars of the story, but I do know that when the big publishers came to him, he set the terms. Let's just put it that way. So that's
a good place to be.
But that's kind of a dream story, and I think it's hard to be a Hugh Howey, so I don't want to set people up for that. But I would like to back up, because I think that self-publishing, when you were saying, Justine, that no matter if you're traditionally published or self-published, you've got to be doing a lot of stuff. And with self-publishing, it's like, and when you're saying the self-published author is essentially an entrepreneur and an author, and you're not just like a marketing entrepreneur. You're an entrepreneur in a bunch of different ways to get that book in the world and sell it. So I was wondering if you could kind of walk us through, what are the steps that a writer needs to know in terms of taking that manuscript all the way to an independent bookstore's shelf, say?
Oh, yes, it goes on quite the journey. So the first thing is to have it edited, to have your book edited. And then once the book is to a place where you feel that it is a finished product, and we can talk about the many steps of editing, but then once it's finished, it's time to actually make your files print ready, as we say in the industry. So they have to be laid out by a designer. So that means making your Word file a pretty book interior with all the fonts perfect, and which is actually a lot harder than people think it is. I have spent so much time in InDesign toiling. So please hire someone good. And then also doing really good cover design. I know that people say that you don't judge a book by the cover, but you really do. A good cover really speaks to readers. So investing in a really beautiful cover that gets the message of your book across to the reader is very, very important. And then once those elements are complete, then you are ready to actually start the process of distribution. And then there's this thing called metadata that very much intimidates people, but really it's a fancy word for information about your book. And IngramSpark has really great courses that you can take online that are free about metadata. So I really encourage everyone to go on our website and check out those courses. They're really, really helpful and will make the process a lot less intimidating. But these are things like your book title, your description, keywords, BISAC codes, which are subject codes. Essentially, it's what bookstores use to figure out where your book goes on a shelf in a store. And so these pieces of data about your book need to be compiled before the book can be distributed. If you're using a self-publishing platform like IngramSpark, they are entered into our platform in 6 steps. And then the last step is actually uploading your book. You also have to think about things like price and discount for your book. Retailers actually need a discount so that they can make money on your book. This is another thing a lot of authors don't think about in terms of how the book industry works. So, and is that book returnable? So can the bookstore return your book? So these are other things that you should research and think about before your book goes out. So like I said, you're a publishing house, you're making business decisions about the price, what discount you're going to give the retailers, if it's returnable. You have to think about your business model on a whole and who you're targeting as your primary retailers. Are you targeting online retailers or brick and mortar bookstores or libraries? Because it's a little bit different for every single one. We have a lot of information about this on our website that's free. So I encourage everyone to check it out because it can be really confusing because it's old stuff that hasn't changed in 100 years. And so it's kind of historical and weird. So don't let it worry you. You'll be able to get it. And if you can't, we have customer service people who will help you through it. And then you can upload your files and we distribute them into the world. But also you should be thinking about your marketing plan and how you're reaching those readers. It's not enough to be distributed to a lot of places. Grant mentioned that we distribute to 39,000 print distribution partners. It's great that the book's out there, but readers have to be told to go look for your book.
Right.
So it's the combination of being discoverable and telling readers to go find the book. So those are pretty much the steps. So you have to be thinking of the actual distribution, the business plan of your publishing company, and the marketing all at the same time.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, and I'm going to jump to this question just because we got one from one of our website viewers here, our webcast viewers. Is this, we've mentioned the importance of finding an editor and a cover designer for that. How do you find a good editor, and especially a good editor at a good price? Not all of us don't have a lot of money to hire editors. I'll start with John since Justine took the last question.
Since you took over.
Sorry about that.
I think finding out, if you can find out from other people who they've used. There's sites, some better than others that you can find. I tend to find people at writers conferences and stuff, and I look at what they're able to do. I have a few go-to people, but I think asking around's the best because it's one of those things that until they're into it, you don't know whether they're good or not. That if they can provide some recommendations of other people that have used them, I think that's essential. And again, there's not one kind of editor. I mean, there's content editors which are looking more at the structure of your book, the sentences flow together, those sorts of things. And you have, kind of a proof person that's dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's, which those are kind of at the two extremes, but there could be 4 or 5 different kinds of edits that your book will undergo. I think early on having a content editor, especially if you've just finished NaNoWriMo, can really start helping you put it together in a much more smooth fashion, especially if they're a writer themselves. And the other thing is you want to make sure you have an editor in your genre. A nonfiction editor may not be really good for romance. I mean, as far as content, especially content editing. So finding the right kind of editor and somebody that is going to give you feedback. I mean, the best editing that I've ever received in anything that I've written are the ones that just look like my English teacher just bled all over the page, because it helps me make it better. And if you can find an editor that's invested in helping you make the best copy possible, you kind of have to feel them out a little bit. If they're not really excited about it, they're not going to be really excited about editing, because editing is hard. And having not only money, and this is one of the things that Justine and I were talking to a client about, is time. It takes time to edit. So think about that. When you're in that process of self-publishing your book, of allowing the time for the person to set. It's not something they're going to sit down in one setting and edit your entire manuscript. You would not want them to do that because they're going to miss something. So I think it's important just to, kind of feel out the person. And, there's different levels of, some people charge by the word, some people by the page. It just really depends. But I would really want to see or hear or talk to somebody else that they've worked with. I think that's essential, because that's going to give me a lot more information than a whole list on a resume of what they've done.
And Justine, you know, for those writers who might not know other people who have had their work edited and might not have, you know, contacts with other authors in that way, I know there are websites out there.
Yeah, so
and then you gotta read it. So yeah.
Some good ones are the Editorial Freelancers Association, or EFA. That's a good starting place to look for editors. We really like New York Editors, which is kind of like a matchmaking service for editors. You tell them what you're looking for, and they match you with someone, and everyone's vetted, which is also really good, so you know that they're legitimate. And then also, we really like Reedsy as well, which is like a marketplace as for creative endeavors. So you can find graphic artists, you can find editors. It's a really great place to kind of start. Also, I would suggest to anyone that before you embark with an editor, to get everything that they're going to do for you in writing, and to have that hashed out ahead of time, so that you know exactly what you're getting for what price and the deadlines for everything. Also, it is a very emotional process, so you have to be emotionally prepared for it as well. So those are my other 2 tips about editing.
Yeah, and you know, we've talked about that. Those are great, and I just want to mention that Reedsy has been a past sponsor of NaNoWriMo as well, and I know a lot of people who've gone there. But those are great resources. And cover designer might be where do you go to find a good cover designer? And I got to say that this is like a big obstacle that I think self-published authors have had to reckon with. Is that I used to hear, and I noticed it too, that you could tell a self-published book by its cover. And that's oftentimes because the author did the cover him or herself. And it really does take a professional to do it. And I also want to say that it's not only about self-publishing. The small press books that I publish, I've actually hired a cover designer to do those as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I tend to do it 2 ways. Reedsy is, again, another great option to look for cover designers. But then also, a little tip, if you go into a bookstore and you look through the books, most oftentimes cover designers are credited in the first few pages of the book. So if you find covers that you really like and you write down the names of the people, you can Google them and see if they're doing freelance work on the side. So that's another way you can kind of go about it. I've known some authors who have found their authors or their cover designers that way.
Okay, great. Well, I'm curious, John, since you're a self-published author.
Yeah, you know,
IngramSpark.
You know, I've helped other people. All the books that I've had published were traditionally published, most of them small press, but I do help a lot of people go through that. And I don't know if I'm the only one here, but I'll just keep talking. But 99 Designs is another place that I recommend people go to as a place to get to get some designs done. Are you there, Justine? I don't know if I'm the only one talking.
No, you're there. Yeah, you're fine.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
So, you know, I was saying 99 Designs, but, you know, I think it also goes back to that investment that, you know, people have to be willing to pay a couple dollars. They've invested all this time and effort into editing and creating a book, that spending $5 for it's just you and me, Justine. We're the only ones left.
I don't. Oh, no. Okay. Let's keep going.
Okay. So, but I think that, you know, having that investment and just thinking about that, you know, not having your cousin do it or anything else, there's a psychology. Hey, he's back. Okay. But there's a psychology to cover design, you know, that just because somebody's good at one kind of art doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to really create a really great cover. So I think, again, vetting that person or going to a site like Reedsy, you know, is the best way to do it, because then at least you know that they've gone through some vetting process and they can show you samples of what they've done.
I have no idea what I missed, guys, but here I am.
Oh, it was so fantastic. You just missed it all. No, we were just talking about, you had asked me about cover design.
Yeah.
And, and I just mentioned, that there's an investment involved, that you don't want to spend all this time. When people hire me to ghostwrite, they'll and I had a person come to me with something that they went to, and I hate to say it, they went to Fiverr to get their cover. And literally spent $5 on their cover. And I was like, you spent all this money for me, and you just spent $5 on your cover. No, we got to hire somebody to do it, because people, what they say that it takes about 5 seconds for them to look at a cover of the book, maybe about 15 seconds to look at the back and read the copy there, and they're already making a decision whether they want to open that book or not. So it has there again, the colors, the fonts, all that stuff has to be done by somebody who knows what they're doing.
Yeah. Just so the viewers know, we're having a little bit of internet troubles here. So if I freeze or go off air, fortunately, John and Justine can do this all themselves. You really don't need me here. And I have too many questions I just realized to ask today, but I do want to talk a little bit about marketing, because I think this is a big challenge for every author, actually, or most authors, because we tend to be these introverted creatures who just want to write our books. We don't really want to go out there and sell them, but more and more these days, that's what you have to do, and you have to become a marketer. And it's tough. I mean, I think that's a huge learning curve. You have to think about how to get reviews, maybe going out and getting speaking gigs or giving readings, how to give giveaways on social media or promotions, how to find bloggers to review your books, all these different things. What advice would you give to someone who's a newbie or an introvert about how to best market their first book, and novels in particular?
John, do you want to take this one?
You were going to say that. I think it's, actually I've gotten a lot of really good advice about novels from Justine. So she'll have some brilliant things to say, I'm sure. But I think it's just knowing your audience. You have to go to where they are. I always use the analogy of fishing. If you want a particular kind of fish that you want to catch, you got to go there. So, the example that Justine had given me was I'm writing a middle grade, is to start, marketing toward, or starting connecting to mommy bloggers and librarians and people that are going to be the ones buying the book. And, to start trying to make connections and building your platform there. But I think you're right. You can't, marketing, I always say marketing starts the day that you really want that book to come out. So it starts even when you're writing. Any of the books that I've written, I've already started the marketing as I go, because I know that people aren't going to buy the book. It's not like you write it and they will come. That it takes some effort. So getting out there, trying to get your name, social media, of course, is great. Engagement's better, so you could have 1,000 followers or 10,000 followers, but if they're not engaged, and when it comes time for you to get your book out there, they're really not going to, they're not going to hear you. So I think it's sometimes people have to hire, agencies, although they can be extremely expensive to hire a PR agency to help you. But I think there are strategies, especially with novels, using things like KDP to try to use different kinds of programs that they have to try to get people reading it, because word of mouth is what's going to spread. That's your greatest marketing. It's getting in as many hands as you can early on, even if you're cutting the price, slashing the price, making it free, whatever. Try to get people starting to talk about it. Try to get people to not only talk about it, but start putting reviews out there. That changes, algorithms on Amazon and places like that. But again, with the word of mouth is what it's going to spread. Your book. Talk to librarians. Offer to do children's program on your book if you're doing YA or whatever. But try to it's hard. It's hard because we do tend to be introverts. But if you're not out in the world, nobody's going to know it's there. I mean, there's just blogging, getting on other people's podcasts. That gets back to the entrepreneur part of writing a book, especially if you're self-publishing. You have to become your own PR person. So you're going to have to go out there. You're going to have to call the newspaper or write to the newspaper or write to a local television show. Talk about your book. Try to go to fairs and stuff. I mean, just getting out there, shaking people's hands, tell them about your book, and be prepared. That's the one thing I'll say about marketing, and I'll shut up. Be prepared to talk about your book in about 3 sentences. Because if you don't know what your book is, you'll never be able to sell that book, because if you don't get it, they're not going to get it. So really work hard. They call it an elevator pitch, but I think it's even shorter than that. If you can do it in 3 sentences to describe your book, and there's actually a number of sites out there that you can look up what they call like log lines. That's a very powerful thing. So no matter where you are, even if you're in the grocery line and somebody hears you're an author, or you're just in a conversation, you can tell them about your book in 3 sentences that will immediately hook them and want to know more. So I'll shut up and let Justine talk.
Go for it, Justine.
I totally agree with John that your book is not for everyone. If you tell me, oh, my book is for everyone, it's a story that will resonate with the whole world, you are wrong. It is not true. You have to know who your audience is so that you can market to them. That goes for retailers as well. From my perspective, since I'm on the distribution side of things, I look at things from a marketing to retailers perspective. And that means, to me, building relationships with your retailers well before that book comes out. And as one of my friends who's an agent always says, that means being a good literary citizen. And that means going to frequent your independent bookstores, going to your libraries, and being a patron of those places, and knowing who the players in those settings are before you even publish. Because then when your book comes out, they already know who you are. You're a known entity. So that when you go to make your pitch to them to put your book on a shelf, it's a lot less awkward for everyone involved. And when you do go to make those pitches, you have to be really prepared. And this is where the business aspect comes in again. You have to be professional. There's this thing in the world called a sell sheet. And this is pretty much a 1-page paper. It's like a resume for your book. And it tells the retailer everything they need to know. It has a picture of the cover, the list price, the ISBN, a description, everything about your book. And that is something that you can leave with the retailer or librarian when you're talking about the book. And that is so crucial for them. And that is a piece of marketing in addition to selling. It's also trying to set up book signings. You don't necessarily have to do a signing. Offer to do a book club with your local library. Or even if you hear about local book clubs, try to infiltrate them and say, can we read my book this time around? And that gets the word of mouth going as well. And so the other thing that I like to tell people is Kwame Alexander, the wonderful YA author, who is a lovely human being, did this amazing thing when his first book came out. It was poetry. And he told all of his family and friends to go into their local bookstore and to request his book. So they didn't have it on the shelves, but he said to the local bookstore, can you order this book for me? And enough people did it that the bookstores took notice and stocked the book. And this was a very effective strategy for him. You have to, so things like that. Think about who you can get to go into the stores and ask them to order your book. That also means being retailer agnostic. You can't just focus on Amazon. They are 70% of the market, but send people to your local independent bookstores, your local Barnes & Noble, and your local library. Spreading the love is good for everybody in the marketing world and in the sales world. It's going to get you very far. So in terms of marketing, always remember all the retailers, use your family and friends to go talk to the bookstores, as well as be a good literary citizen yourself.
I loved your comment about being a good literary citizen, because I think one key part of marketing is not only think about what you're getting, but what you're giving. And I do think it's reciprocal. The more you give the world and support other writers and bookstores, the more they're going to help you too. I want to switch over to some of our questions from our viewers here. And one person has asked if you have any book recommendations for people who are going to be self-publishing for the first time, or any time really.
Oh, yes. One of my authors who has been wildly successful is the Instagram poet, Robert Drake. He makes absolutely beautiful books that are beautiful inside and out. And he has wonderful marketing on his Instagram and everywhere. I really suggest that one. And also Pierre Alexandre, who is another poet. The poets have been killing it, who also is really amazing at marketing and book design. So I really encourage everyone to check those two guys out. They're really amazing.
I'm going to just mention my Right-Minded podcast partner, Brooke Warner, who has been on this webcast as well, IngramSpark sponsored webcast. And I know she works a lot with you, and her book, Greenlight Your Book, is fabulous, a fabulous resource. John, how about you? Anything to recommend?
As far as the self-publishing, I think those were, I can't think of anything more than what you've already mentioned.
Okay, good. Well, here's a question. Let me see. This is Dave Maloney. He asked, "Can I self-publish with a pseudonym?" I think I know the answer to this.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yes.
There's a rich history of literary pseudonyms, right?
Right. Make it really a cool one. I mean,
that's definitely.
Have fun with it.
Let's see. This is from Karen Carey. She says, "I've recently published my first book, self-published on Amazon, and I did use an editor. I would like to get it out in the bookstores. What's the next step for this?" This is a big question, actually. How do you get in the bookstores?
The next step, there's two things that she needs to do. Typically, bookstores don't buy from Amazon because they're seen as a competitor. So keep that in mind. But also, so IngramSpark is a good place. Sorry, shameless plug. A good place to upload your book if you want to get into bookstores. But also keep in mind discount and returnability for independent bookstores. They work on really tight margins, so they look for what we call a full trade discount in the publishing world, which is 53 to 55%. And returnability. So those are the terms that bookstores look for when they're purchasing the book. And you can always tell them that the book is available through Ingram, which is how they would purchase the book.
Okay. Hannah Crenshaw asks, do you want to get a separate email if you self-publish? And I think that also brings up the question, I don't know if you guys touched on it yet, but just an author website, right? There's kind of a toolbox you need in order to have a presence to sell your book. So can you speak to that?
I think that you can. You want to have some place where people can go and see, see what what your work is. So it's not a necessity, but it is helpful because again, you want to build that presence, and especially if you want to sell off of Amazon. You would definitely want to have that because, again, if you're trying to sell the books, and we didn't really talk about, the pricing, but you're going to be taking home a lot more money if you're selling the books, say directly through Ingram, than you are through Amazon, because Amazon's going to make a discount on that. So as much as you can sell the book yourself, the better. It's, again, if you're going to use a pseudonym or whatever, but it makes sense. So that you don't miss things, if somebody's asking about your book or whatever, it does kind of separate it out as more of a business, but it also helps you grow. So if people are emailing you or you're starting to get responses and you want to send out things like newsletters, it's really helpful to have a separate email to do all those sorts of things so that you're speaking and building your fan base.
I would even go so far as to say set up your own LLC on LegalZoom if you're going to be really serious about it, because it protects you as an author so that you're actually a legal entity in your own business, so that it doesn't impact you personally. So that would also be my suggestion. Not only have your website and your email, but actually be a business.
This next question comes from Dale. It's a really good one. He asks, can I find some good sample marketing plans somewhere? I know every book's different and every book's marketed different, but do you kind of have some templates, perhaps even on the IngramSpark resources?
We have a course about marketing on our academy, but I'd actually have to do some research about where some good sample marketing plans are. I believe... Amy Collins from New Shelves may have something out there, but don't quote me on that. But we definitely have a course on marketing. But again, it kind of differs by book. Like if you're marketing a romance book, it's going to be a lot different than a self-help book. So it kind of depends. But I always think of it in buckets. Like think of like your social and your retailers and then like appearances as different things, and then kind of go from there.
Mm-hmm.
I would add to that not only, whether you have a template, a formal template, is what I like to do, especially with self-publishing, is to create a plan that works backwards from your launch date, and having different tasks and different things you're going to do as far as marketing, and just back it up, once you've decided, because it's really important to have that calendar so that you're going to be blasting something here, you're going to be doing a pre-sale there, and just really creating it backwards. And that really helps, because then you have a better idea of a timeline, because all of these things take time. So when you're handing your book to an editor or to a cover designer, any of those things, it's now out of your control. So you have to give some time and room. I've seen people bump up against a timeline because they didn't think it through. So whatever your marketing plan is, just start backing it, back it up from the time. Even media appearances, if you want to do something on a local television or newspaper, they need some lead time. So you're going to have to think, 2-3 weeks, maybe even a month ahead of time to be on a show. So you have to have your book to give them. So again, it's just kind of backing away from, I have a book, I want to do media, and then I want to launch. That you have to just work backwards. That's my best advice, and just create a calendar.
I'm going to jump to a question because we have a couple questions about beta readers, and I know beta readers are important to authors. And so one question is just how to find a good beta reader, and then another question is like, if you have a good beta reader, do you really need an editor?
Ooh.
I think beta readers are a really good pulse for where your book is. And where to find them, there's a few websites out there where you can actually find them. And I'm going to blank on their names. But I feel like if you Google it, you can find them. And I feel like a few blogs also offer it, but also your local reader groups, like chapters of certain, like if you're a romance writer, like your local chapter of RWA, or if you're a thriller writer, there's like local chapters of those different associations. Definitely seek those chapters out to find beta readers. That's a really good place as well. If you have a really good beta reader, I feel like that's a good place to start, but you still need an editor because they may be very personal to your work. So you still need that objective party to really get into the nitty gritty.
I would totally agree. I'd add one more thing about beta readers is one of the things I do with authors is, instead of just handing a book and saying, what do you think, with a beta reader, is come up with maybe 10 questions for them to answer about the book. And also give them a deadline. Or they'll just, they won't know the necessity of you getting that material back. But I found that questions really help, because then they actually have to read it. And I know that sounds silly, but They actually have to read it, but they're going to give you the feedback that you need specifically. Whether it's, was there a good conflict, or what do you think of this particular character, whatever it is. But just to have some of those questions for them to answer it's very helpful.
Mm-hmm. And
I
then
agree, John.
Yeah,
I even try to keep it fewer than 10. I keep it in the 3 to 5 range, just to kind of keep things very, very focused on what I want. I find that really, really helpful for beta readers. Let's see. This one comes from Danny C, who asks, you mentioned this earlier, Justine, about the whole remainder or return policy that bookstores have, that's been kind of written in to stone from the beginning of time, with the relationship between booksellers and books distributors and authors. So the question is, can you put a limit on the number of books that can be returned with IngramSpark? Is it true that self-publishers must pay for books that can be returned?
So the return policy is actually as old as time. You are correct. And here's how it works. So there are 3 different types of returnability with IngramSpark. You can do return and destroy, where if a book is returned, we destroy it on your behalf. Return and ship, where we ship it to the author. You have to pay shipping. And then also non-returnable. Non-returnable is always an option. And the policy that is as old as time is that a retailer has 180 days, yes, 180 days to return the book. And there is no limit to how many books they can return. And this has been the policy for forever. So before you make a decision on, and also I must note, you pay the wholesale price that the retailer paid for the book. So if you have a $14.99 paperback and a 55% discount, the retailer pays $6.75 for the book. So every return you get charged $6.75. So keep that in mind when you enter the returns game. So I always say to authors, if you are going to do returns, set some money aside for returns so that if they happen, you are prepared. But at Spark, we see a very low return rate because everything is on demand. So people are not ordering the book unless they actually really want it and someone is actively seeking out the book and ordering it. They're not ordering these massive, massive quantities to have stock. Like in other scenarios. So we see a very, very low returns rate, but keep those things in mind when you are thinking about your business plan.
Well, hey, John, since we were talking about beta readers, Julia Purdy asks, what are some good questions to ask beta readers? And I know every different, of course, yeah. But what are some 2 or 3 questions to help people get good feedback?
I think the questions have to do with kind of the pitfalls. Did the first lines or the first chapter grab you? Was the ending of the book satisfying? Did you you can ask about the main characters. Were they believable? Were they did you get a sense of who they were? And I think one of the big ones is, was there the voice in the book? Especially if it's a kind of a narrated book, was it a strong voice? Did you get a sense of the author in the book? But I think those are, and then were the plots believable? Again, I think that the questions are going to change with the type of book. But I think the beginning and an end. I mean, if anybody's watched Game of Thrones, boy, how endings can be. Oh, you want to go there, but. Endings are so important to people. They are so important because people get really invested in a book. And if it doesn't end the way that they feel, then they're not going to want to read any more of your books just because they're going to be so upset with it. So an ending of a book is important. And again, asking specifically if you were disappointed, or if it just wasn't believable or whatever it was, what would you recommend? So you're really just asking them open-ended questions. Of course, you don't want a yes or no. You want them to, describe what it is they liked or didn't like. Again, if they're not captured by the first chapter, the first couple paragraphs, you've kind of lost them. And so again, what about it wasn't engaging, or what about it was engaging, or I try to shy away from things like what's your favorite part of the book, although you could put that in there. But again, to keep the number of questions really tight, I think it's important to just look at, the areas that books don't do well, that can fail. Those sort of plot lines and, the arc and all those things that we need in a book. But it's just, again, just looking at those kinds of things, especially if it's genre specific, there's certain things that should be in a genre, whether it's romance or horror or whatever, making sure those elements are there. I just did NYC Midnight short story, and that taught me a lot about writing, because there had to be specific elements of the genre. And that was a really good, experiment for me to try to nail that, because there are kind of things that have to be there to make it really fit well into that genre. Of course, you want to break rules sometimes, but if you're going to say it's a romance book, there better be some definite elements of romance.
You better have a happily ever after. That's all I can say.
See, there you go. Was there a happily ever after in the book?
Yeah, I've heard people ask where people lose attention, when they get bored,
Right.
Especially if you're writing a plot-driven novel. Let me think. I've heard, I think you touched on the basics, but I think it is like to identify your own worries about the book and to form questions around those. I've heard people ask about what should be cut, if there's anything that's too much. I think sometimes we always think about what can be added to make it more exciting, but cutting things is really important. Yeah. Cool. I'm going to check and see if we have any questions here, other ones. One question I think is because it is, I think with self-published books, it is a big hurdle to get them into the bookstores and libraries. And, I guess you guys both made the case of emailing the bookstores and libraries and contacting them and developing a relationship with them. But is that enough? When I go to a library, I'm not convinced that I can convince the librarian to carry my books. And maybe that's just my insecurities speaking. But how do you overcome that hurdle?
I would say that it is tough, especially for introverted authors, because you have to convince a bookstore or library to take another book off the shelf for your book, and that's a hard proposition. However, if you're prepared with a sell sheet, your book, you've been a good literary citizen and you've built those relationships, I think it's a little less intimidating. You also have to go in ready to talk about what you can bring to that store or library. So come armed with ideas for events you could do or how you could contribute to that literary environment. Because then you're not just bringing a book, you're adding to their store or library as well with your own, personal contributions. So I think those things definitely help with the hurdle. It's not a perfect world, and also I would say start local. A lot of the local bookstores and libraries like to support local indie authors.
That's true.
So make sure that your author location is in your metadata so that they can find you. They do search for things like that. So make sure that that's there so that they know that you're one of their own. So I think those are the big takeaways, but it may not happen. So keep that in mind as well.
I would add a couple other things. First of all, if I was going to go and I wanted it in a particular library or bookstore, I would go in and try to tap into their expertise, which is, hey, look, I've just written this book and I'm just not really sure what genre, and then they'll say, well, what's it about, right? So you're already having a conversation about your book, but tapping into their expertise, because people feel like, okay, you can start a conversation that way. And just asking them, what do you think is the best way to do this or this? That they love that, because a lot of times they're in the library all day and don't have a whole lot of people to ask them questions. So they like that. And I've had a number of libraries that I've done research and just talking to them, and they're like, oh no, you absolutely have to come back and do a book signing here. So I think but for bookstores, the other tip I would give is go to other people's book signings. You're going to start making connections with other authors. Sometimes authors like to do things together. So that's, so start getting yourself into the community. But the best way to do it is if you meet an author, at a book signing, ask them how they did it. They might say, well, so-and-so, she's right over there. You can talk to her about your book. So just be present, be out there, do these kinds of things and learn how other people do it. It's not a innate skill that we know how to do book signings and promotion. So go out there and see what other people are doing, and just ask them questions. I mean, I as an author, I love to answer questions of other authors. I like to promote other authors, but they have to kind of be out there and and making an effort. So I would just say be out there. Just get people to know your name, become a member of a writing group or whatever. Again, another great resource we hadn't really talked about, book groups. That's the other way that you can really promote your book, is to find a book, groups of people that like to read books. And they love when authors show up to their groups to talk about their book. So just looking for those opportunities too. One of the things is making sure that the bookseller can get your book. I found that authors have a hard time, let's say with Barnes & Noble, of getting them to do a book signing or their books in a store if they can't find it. If they can't go to their computer and immediately find your book because it's under the right distribution like Ingram, that if they can't find your book, they're going to say, well, you're going to have to bring your own books, or, and then it just becomes this real complicated thing of you having to bring your own books, and then they sell it, and then 6 months later, you might get a check back from them. And so where if you go through a distributor like Ingram, that's all taken care of. And then you're not having to bring, 100 of your own books and seeing what you can do.
One of my favorite, sorry to interrupt. One of my favorite marketing strategies was our NaNoWriMo author, Susan Denard, who did a big road trip with 3 fellow author friends, and they just hit every little small bookstore along the way and did readings together. And I think it's very empowering to have friends there with you. You're not alone walking into the situation. You're all together. And we've reached time here, and so but I want to leave our viewers with one big empowering message from each of you. And Justine, I'm going to start with you, since you are the indie book Sherpa. What is your number one tip for people to leave with today?
I would say don't get discouraged. It can be a difficult process, but there is a lot of information out there, and there can be a lot of bad information, I will say. But at Spark, we really, really try to educate our authors. And so we've tried to put a lot of really wonderful information about self-publishing on our website. Please, please, please go check it out. An educated author to us is the most important thing about our jobs. We want you armed with as most knowledge as humanly possible, because it's going to make the process so much less intimidating. And then that gives you so much more time to go sit behind that computer and write, which is what you want to actually do. So don't be intimidated. There's lots of resources out there. Please find them.
That's great advice. Now, John, you needed a nickname like the Sherpa,
right.
So I'm going to call you the publishing winemaker. You help people pick the grapes and stomp them and age them into fine wine. So as the publishing winemaker here, what's your number one tip for people to leave with?
I think the number one tip is just keep going. It's work. If anybody says that it's easy to write a book or publish a book, just know that it's work. If you're passionate about it, just keep going. Listen to your heart rather than everybody else's opinion. If you feel like this is a good book, you just keep working it until you get it out into the world. I always say at the point that you're ready to take your manuscript out back, put some gasoline on it and light it on fire, you're almost ready to publish it, because you've gone over it so many times and you worked so hard at it. You're like, I just have to, I have to birth this. I cannot look at it anymore. And I think it's at that level of passion and work that again, put your best out there. Don't shortchange yourself. Just work hard at it, and you'll come out with something great.
Well, thanks so much to both of you. And I want to remind viewers, we did several webcasts earlier this year in our I Wrote a Novel, Now What months. And so we do have webcasts that speak to other aspects of the publishing journey, like finding an agent and things like that. So please check those out. And thank you so much to both of you. It was so inspiring, and I learned so much. Like I said, there's always new stuff to learn about publishing, whether you self-publish or traditionally publish. So hope everyone checks out those IngramSpark resources, and thanks once more to IngramSpark for sponsoring this webcast and for NaNoWriMo in general. Thanks so much, everyone. Oh,
thank you, Grant.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.